All right. Hello, coffee makers, not coffee takers. I'm the People's Chief, Dr. Joseph J. Burt Miller Jr., one half of the Cyber Coffee Hour. Our friends Nash and I hail from Mount Vernon, New York, and we're excited to share our experiences and stories along with those of our incredible guests. Our mission is to impart knowledge, enhance understanding, and cultivate a sense of community in the expansive world of cyberspace. So for today's show, we will have a coffee chat with Akylade Chief Product Officer Jason Dion. Jason Dion is a former college professor, founder, and lead instructor at Dion Training Solutions. Now the chief product officer at Akylade, a newcomer to the cybersecurity certification industry, is trying to change how certifications are done in our industry. As a lead instructor at Dion Training, Jason has taught over 2 million students in 195 countries how to take and pass their IT and cybersecurity certification exams. Jason also holds multiple information technology professional certifications, including Certified Information Systems Security Professional, or CISSP, Certified Ethical Hacker, or CEH, CompTIA Pentest Plus, and dozens of other industry certifications. With networking experience dating back to 1992, Jason has been a network engineer, director of a network operations center, and information systems officer for large organizations worldwide. He holds a Master of Science in Information Technology, specializing in information assurance, and a Bachelor of Science in Human Resources Management. These days, he is focused on eliminating paper tigers from our industry and helping hiring managers find real cybersecurity talent in the marketplace by creating actionable, practical, and hands-on certifications as part of the Acylade team. Jason Dion, welcome to the Cyber Coffee Hour.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming through. I will have to say for myself personally, I follow your content, whether it was, I think really when I was going for my size of plus, just following the material that you put out. And I'm just thinking back, man, I know you work really hard, man, because you was like cranking out these videos and everything, this whole network that you've established and created. I think that's pretty awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, it's amazing how long it takes to make one of those courses. So, you mentioned CYSA Plus, which is CompTIA Cybersecurity Analyst Plus, and that course is about 35 hours of content. So you'd think it takes 35 hours, but to write 35 hours of finished content takes 400, 500 person hours because
Right.
It's not just me, it's me and my whole team. And by the time
Right.
I research it and write it and film it and edit it and produce it and all that stuff, it's months and months of work for each one of those courses. And so it's a lot of work, but it's worth it because we're helping people get their certifications and hopefully change their careers and change their perspective as they move forward.
Absolutely. And I guess what made you like this one day say, I'm a I want to create certification videos and content like
Yeah,
were you inspired by someone or?
it definitely was not a plan. It was one of those things that, like, you look up and you're like, oh wow, I got here. This is not what I was thinking of. So I was actually working for the U.S. government. I was working in and around the U.S. Navy for about 20 years. And
Right.
one of the programs the Navy has is a thing called the Permanent Military Professor Program, where they take people who are mid-career officers and they will basically select you to become a professor at the Naval Academy. Well, I wanted to be a part of that program, and one of the requirements was they wanted somebody who had teaching experience. Well, if you're in the military, how do you get teaching experience? So I actually got a job on the nights and weekends when I was on my shore duty, teaching for a community college, teaching A plus, Network plus, and Security plus, and that's how I got into being a college professor. And long story short, I applied to go become a permanent military professor for the Navy. Unfortunately, they were out of cybersecurity billets at the time. There was no roles for cybersecurity because they had already picked up enough people the year I applied, and so I didn't get it. And so I was like, oh, I'll keep working on this, and I'll apply next year. I'll apply the next year. And so I kept working as a college professor. Well, as I moved from my shore duty into a deployable position again, I wasn't able to teach, Mondays and Wednesday nights or Saturdays or Sundays because I didn't know if I was going to be in that area anymore. And so I was constantly being moved around. And so I moved online as a college professor. In my last class before I moved online, I recorded the videos of my Network Plus course and put them on YouTube because my students are like, hey, as I'm studying for the exam, it'd be great to be able to go back and rewatch what you taught in class, Jason. I'm like, oh, that makes
Right.
sense. So I recorded the last course and I did it and put it on YouTube for a month or two. And then one of my friends at work goes, why don't you put it on Udemy? And I was like, what's Udemy? I hadn't even heard of it.
Right.
This was back in 2016. It wasn't that huge thing it is today.
Yeah.
And so I took the videos from YouTube, I put it on Udemy, I added some quizzes, I added a study guide, and students loved it. And that kind of like, oh, there's actually something here. And so I kept doing that. And long story short, I never got to be the permanent military professor for the Navy because there was never a job opening at the time that I was allowed to apply. But I did end up working for 3 different colleges at the associate's level at the community college. I worked at the bachelor's level for University of Maryland. And I worked at the master's level helping Liberty University create their first cybersecurity master's degree program back in 2016, 2017 timeframe, somewhere around there. And all the while, I started making these courses for Udemy, and it kind of took off. And really, what drives me is, when one student said, "Hey, I passed," and then 2, and then 3, and then 4, I was like, "Oh,
Yeah.
wow!" And I need more. And they're like, "Yeah, I got my Security Plus, or I got my Network Plus. Now I need my A Plus. Now I need my Security Plus. Now I need my CISSP Plus, my Pen Test Plus." And we just kind of expanded and expanded. And over the 8 years or 7 or 8 years that I owned the business, we ended up having about 40 different certification courses that we created over the years. And most of those are me on screen. And then I had a whole team of people behind me that helps with, student support and production and videos and graphics and all that other kind of stuff. And at this point, we now have a handful of other instructors as well, in addition to me, as we've expanded this out. But it's one of those things, like, we just kind of got there. It wasn't like a brilliant plan. And I wasn't like, we're going to be the next major training company. It just kind of happened that way.
Right.
And I've always created content that I thought students would like, and students liked it. And then we kind of became this name in the industry. If you go for CompTIA stuff, usually one of the first 3 names people will say is Jason Dion or Dion Training. The other 2 big players is obviously Professor Messer at professormesser.com and Mike Myers from Total Seminars. And those are kind of the 3 biggest that you'll see pretty much each and every time when people talk about CompTIA certs at this point.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Well, again, definitely appreciate you coming through.
Yeah.
And let's go ahead and dig into this. So first, as you talk about Dion Training, so being the founder of Dion Training, now Chief Product Officer at Akylade, what inspires you to transition from teaching millions of students to develop a new approach to cybersecurity certification?
Yeah, so that's it's a great question, because that is really why I started doing Accolade. Was I looked at the industry, and I've become a really pretty big player in the industry for cybersecurity certifications with the work I do with IDLE and Prince 2 and ISC Squared and CompTIA and all the others. And I kept finding the same problem over and over. And as I talked to my hiring manager friends, I said, what is the most important thing when you're trying to hire somebody into cybersecurity, right? And they say, well, there's 3 things I'm always looking for, right? I'm looking for experience, I'm looking for certifications, and I'm looking for degrees. And I'm looking for them in that order, right? Well, the challenge there is the experience is the hardest one, right? I can go to college for 4 years and get a degree. I can go to a boot camp for 5 days and get a security plus. But experience is something you can only get from doing the job, right? And it's that classic catch-22. It's like, well, I only hire people with experience. Well, how do I get experience if nobody will hire me, right?
Exactly.
And so we have the same problem over and over again. And I talked to some of my hiring manager friends, and I have some friends who work at very large consulting companies that run very large MSPs and things like that. And I talked to one of the guys who runs a tier 3 SOC, and I go, well, how do you find your people for your SOC? He goes, well, I hire from tier 2. I only hire internally. I'm like, oh, okay. So I talked to the tier 2 person. I said, well, how do you hire people? He goes, I only hire from tier 1. Okay. I talked to the tier 1 person. I go, well, how do you hire? I'm like, what certs are important to you? Is it CYSA? Is it Pen Test Plus? Is it CCNA? What do you need? And he goes, honestly, the certs aren't that important to me, because what I find is when I hire somebody with a certification, they can't do the job anyway, because most of the certifications on the market now are A, B, C, D questions, right? Even CYSA that you talked about earlier, CYSA is a good certification, and you learn some good information in it. But just passing a CYSA doesn't tell me you can be a SOC analyst, right? It means you have the baseline knowledge to talk about it. You understand what an XML injection is and what an SQL injection is and what a buffer overflow is. But can you actually perform one? Can you actually identify one? Can you actually, use a SIEM? And having taught people these CompTIA certifications, I always thought, oh, this is great, they're going to get a job. And then what I was finding is people may get an interview because they have those certs, because that helps get them to the applicant tracking system. But even once they get to the interview, they fall down because they can't actually do the job. Or even if they can get hired and they can talk a good game, they show up on day 1 to the office and they're useless to the company. And within 2 weeks, they're like, these people suck, and they get rid of them, right? Because they just can't do the job. And that's one of the problems with the certification industry, is we have all this thing like, well, if you just get your Security Plus, you'll get a job. Well, no, that's not true. If you get a Security Plus, you may get an interview for a job, right? And you may get into the cut. You may get an offer, and now you may get the job, but can you actually do the job? And that's the problem. So what we've done at Acylade is we started looking at, how can we create certifications that actually test skills that you would do on the job on a daily basis so you can actually perform the work day one, because that's what hiring managers need. And so at Acylade, we have a advisory council made up of hiring managers, executives, vice presidents, C-level executives, et cetera, from across the industry, including Google and Microsoft and BlackBerry and others, that said, look, here's the problems we're having in hiring people. We can't find enough good quality people that have the skills we need and the experience we need to fill these roles. And the bigger problem that we're having at large right now is with the rise of automation and orchestration and now AI, a lot of the jobs that were entry level are now going away.
Right.
We talk about this all the time, at least on my old podcast, Your Cyber Path. We used to talk about this all the time. People say, hey, what's a good entry level cybersecurity job? I said, well, that's like saying, what's a entry level 787 Dreamliner pilot, right? If you've ever been on a big plane and you've flown from DC to Tokyo or DC to Paris, you get on one of those planes that has 400 or 500 people. They're the huge Boeing planes. And my next door neighbor when I lived in Maryland was a Dreamliner pilot, and he had been flying for 30 years. And when he became a Dreamliner pilot, he already had 20 years of experience and tens of thousands of flight hours flying 767, 757, 747s, and 737s. And even before you get to a 737, you have to be a prop plane, propeller plane pilot for usually a couple of years and get 1,000 or 2,000 hours. And before you even get hired on an airline to do that, you've got to go be a flight instructor for a year or two to get enough flight hours, right? Or be in the military. And so this idea of like entry-level cybersecurity is more like that. It's an entry-level brain surgeon. It's an entry-level pilot, right? You've got all these things you have to do before you get to be entry-level. And if you think back to our industry, what was a traditional career path that we told people to get into for the last 20, 25 years? Go to the help desk, then work your way up to field services, then go become a network or a systems administrator. And then after that 1 to 3 years, you've got enough experience to move into cyber. Because how can you defend something if you don't know how it's going to operate? Well, the challenge with that is we used to have this beautiful triangle, right? And let's say there's 100 people coming in at A+ and becoming a help desk person. Maybe 90% of those will move up to field services. Maybe 70% of those will become network administrators. And then 30% of those will become cyber folks. So out of the 100 people coming in the career field, we might expect 30% of those to end up being cyber folks after 1 to 3 years. Well, that's great if we have a nice big base like that. But what's happened is because of the orchestration, the automation, and the AI, those entry-level roles at field service and help desk have been going away in large numbers. I used to run a really large network that had 1 million endpoint users across 6 continents and 40 plus countries, right? And we used to have tens of thousands of help desk people. Well, now we've gotten that down to a fraction of that, because when's the last time you had to go call somebody to reset your password? Right? Never.
Yeah.
You just go online, you say, forgot password, it sends you a link, you do it yourself, right?
Exactly.
So much of the stuff we do nowadays has been shifted left to the consumer. When's the last time you had to call somebody to your house to install a printer for you? Probably never, right? Because in the last 25 years, you simply plug it in through USB, it downloads the driver, and it installs it. When I got started back in the mid-90s, like, it would take an hour or two to install a printer because you had to configure the drivers and the interrupts and the right cabling and all the other stuff that went with it, right?
It used to be a big job.
Yeah, but technology's gotten so much easier that our end users are now pretty much digital natives and can do that themselves. And so a lot of those entry-level jobs have gone away. And because of that, we now have this diamond where there's 20 or 30% of the jobs are here at the help desk. And then we need and cyber has grown. We need 50% of the people for us to be able to have, enough cybersecurity folks. And then at the C-suite, you've got like 10% of the people. So we now have this diamond. And the problem is the only way to solve the hiring gap with the diamond is you've got to get people in at that middle level at cybersecurity. And so what becomes an entry-level cybersecurity job? And that's what we're trying to focus on is what are these jobs that could be entry or mid-level in cyber? And how can we create a test that isn't just A, B, C, D, but actually puts you in the role of that? So you can see, do I know how to do this? And can I be value add from day one? So long answer to your question, but that's what really inspired me was, for 7 years, I was training people how to get certifications. And for the first couple of years, I was hearing all these stories of, yeah, I got my certification, I got a job. Yeah, I got my certification, I got a job. And in the last 2 or 3 years, I'm hearing a lot more of, I got my certification. And I've been searching now for 2, 3, 4, 5 months because there's so many less jobs at that entry level. I had one person, he put in 1,000 applications until he got a job. And the job he got was basically like a network installer, right? Which is a very entry level job making 15, 20 bucks an hour. But he did that for a year and now he's into cyber making 100 grand, right? But he had to get in first. But the problem is as we keep reducing those entry level jobs, there has to be another way. And that's what Akylade is trying to do with the hiring managers we work with our advisory council is create something that a hiring manager can go, yes, I see that, Joseph has his Acylade certified cyber resilience professional or practitioner. And if he has that, I know he can do the job of a cybersecurity consultant, right? As opposed to saying, oh, he's got a security plus. Sure, he knows what the CIA triad is, but can he actually configure encryption? Can he actually go through logs? Can he actually do analysis? Because Security Plus doesn't do any of that, right? It just tells you about it, right? It's just, here's the information. And so we're trying to move from information into a transformation and an experience replacement, because it's the only way we're going to fill the cybersecurity skills gap. And I hate that people call it the cybersecurity skills gap. They say, oh, there's 3.5 million jobs that are going to be empty this year and blah, blah, blah. It's not a skills gap. There's plenty of people out there with the skills, but how do we identify those people at scale to be able to hire them if there's not a certification, a degree, or experience on their resume, right? And so that's why we're coming at this from the certification perspective, because if we can make hands-on tests and hands-on certifications that matter, that will solve a lot of this thing and give people an entry into the cybersecurity world without having to have the 2 years, 3 years of experience, because we have to overcome that. We have to start looking at cyber the way we look at plumbers and welders, where you get some training, you get some certifications, and then you get hands-on experience while you're on the job to really take you from that entry level into a mid-level and be able to move on in your career. But until we start doing that as an industry, we're still going to have this cybersecurity skills gap, or hiring gap, as I like to call it, for the next 20 years. And we're all going to continue to suffer as organizations.
You know, well, for one, I definitely appreciate that response. Very thorough. No, but I agree. I think for a lot of folks that are trying to get started in the industry, it's definitely different now than it was, especially when I got started. Entry level, I would say the definition of entry level has definitely changed.
Yeah.
And I've seen, as you mentioned, as I have my own study hall online through Discord, some of my mentees that I speak with, and those are getting started, they express some of those frustrations when they talk about, they're trying to go for, whether it's Security Plus, Net Plus, whatever the case is, and having struggles trying to get that first job, just trying to get in. And I think that needs to be a mindset shift, as to not so much focus on getting the certification to say, yes, that I get a certification, that means I get the job. Not necessarily.
What I always say is the certification will help you get through the hiring system. And we can talk about ATS, the applicant tracking system, if we want to. I mean, when you apply for a job, it's not a person actually looking at your resume. I know people go, I put 1,000 resumes in and nobody's looking at it. I'm like, yeah, nobody's looking at it. You're right. Because the computer's looking at it. And if you're not writing for that computer, you're not going to ever get into the hiring manager's desk. One of the stories I used to tell in my old class on how to get hired was when I was a hiring manager back in the 2010. I was hiring for a job, and we said on the job very clearly, must have CISSP, right? Because in this position, it was part of the contract. You had to have CISSP, and if you didn't get your CISSP within 6 months of being hired, we had to fire you. And this job was overseas, where if we moved you and your family over, it was going to cost us $50,000. And if we had to fire you, we'd have to send you back. And the last couple of people they had hired did not have a CISSP, and like, it's okay, they'll get their certification. Well, you and I both know CISSP pass rate is somewhere around 20%. I know people have taken that test 4, 5, 6 times and not passed it. It's a very difficult exam the way they write it. It doesn't mean it's a really good exam. It doesn't mean you can actually do anything, but it still is considered to be a pinnacle in the IT career and cybersecurity career right now, because it's been around for so long. But so we said must have CISSP. Well, the hiring manager went, or I was a hiring manager, so the HR folks went out and put out the job ad. They said, hey, we're hiring for this position. It was a pretty good paying position, mid 6 figures kind of position. And we got about 1,000 resumes that submitted for this position. So HR does their job, and they, quote, filtered them down. This was before we really had applicant tracking systems that could do this automatically. And so a human actually went there and looked through all those resumes. And that human went through and they said, these are human resource people. They're not cyber people. They don't know what we need. All they know is they said, must have CISSP. So every application that had the word CISSP ended up coming into the stack. And out of the 1,000, we had about 83 applications that had CISSP on it. So they sent them to me as the hiring manager. Now, I am a hiring manager, but I'm also an IT director. I've got a real job to do. I've got 500 employees. I've got all this stuff. So how much time do I have to look through 83 resumes? It's not a ton, right? So I spend an entire day. And generally, when somebody's looking at your resume, they're spending 6 to 60 seconds. That's right. Less than 1 minute on your resume. So if you write this big, beautiful book of 20-page resumes, no one's going to read it. They're never going to have time. It should be one page, front and back at most. It should be bullet points, etc. Anyway, so this was a government job. So we had really, really large resumes. Each one was 15, 20 pages. So I got them all as PDF. The first thing I did was Control F, CISSP. And I looked at where the CISSP was coming up. Out of those 83, do you know how many people actually had CISSP?
Out of the 83, well, probably less than 10.
3. 3 candidates. So guess who
Oh,
got
man.
interviewed? Those 3 candidates. So did they get the
Right.
job because of a CISSP? No, but they actually got, that was my easy filter mechanism. I went from 1,000 to 83 that said they had CISSP. And when you looked at it, a lot of it said planning to take my CISSP, went to
Oh,
a
yeah.
CISSP boot
Yeah.
camp. I'm studying for my CISSP. And some of them were like, I took a boot camp 2 years ago. And I'm like, if you took it 2 years ago and you haven't passed it, it tells me A, you're lazy and haven't taken it, or B, you can't pass it and you've tried multiple times. Either way, you're not my candidate. Rejected,
Right.
next person, right? So the 3 people who actually had a CISSP, they got the interview and we chose one from there. And I tell this story because that's what certifications are used for. It doesn't tell me the person can do the job. It means they can meet the minimum requirements, they can speak as part of the team, and they understand the basics of cybersecurity or how this stuff applies. And now I can evaluate them. Out of the 1,000, I've got 3 that I'm considering who are actually going to get the job, or hopefully one of those 3 is qualified enough to get the job. And if not, then I'd have to expand my search. But that's what certifications tend to be used for these days. It's a filtering mechanism more than anything else, or a key to maybe getting an interview, right? And if you don't have it, like if you didn't have CISSP in your resume, one of those other 800 and some odd people, guess what? It would have just never even got to my desk as a hiring manager. You could be the perfect candidate who's got 20 years of experience and you have a master's degree in cybersecurity or a PhD in cybersecurity, and you've been doing this for 20 years. You've got all this experience. I never would have seen you because you didn't have the word CISSP on that resume,
Right.
because that was what was being asked for in the job description. So that's the place of certifications in today's industry. It doesn't mean you could do the job. It doesn't mean you're knowledgeable. It just means you got at least a baseline that you can at least talk intelligently, hopefully, about this. But then the other side is I see people who have 30 and 40 certifications. We didn't read all my certifications out, but I have 40 or 50 certifications. So we're not going to waste your time by reading them all out.
Yeah.
Does that mean that I'm a really great candidate because I have all these certifications? No. It's because I'm a teacher, and if I'm going to teach these certifications, I have to be certified in it. When I was out there working in the field, I had anywhere between 3 and 5 key certifications. And if you had those 3 to 5, you were covering your bases. It got me into the interview pool, and now I could sell myself in the interview. But this is what's leading to this idea of paper tigers. I know we're going to talk about that later, where people have all these certifications, but they can't actually do the job. And that's what we're fighting against at Akylade. We're trying to create hands-on practical certifications that put you in the seat of doing the job, because that is the only way to validate that you are ready for this job. And that way we can get hiring managers to say, okay, maybe I don't need 3 years of experience. Maybe I can take somebody who has this certification and this certification and this degree and give them a chance for a year. And if they do well, they might move up to a higher level, and that can become that new entry level in cybersecurity that we really need.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So with your extensive background, in IT and cybersecurity, including numerous certifications, as we just talked about, how do you see the certification landscape evolving, and what improvements does Acylade aim to bring to the industry?
Yeah, so the reason why I started Akylade, this kind of goes back to your first question, is why did I start this thing going from teaching to certifications, is because I saw this need, right? And I have a lot of connections at the current certification providers, right? CISSP, with ISC Squared, CompTIA, Dion Training. We are the #1 CompTIA seller in the world. We sell more CompTIA than anybody else in the commercial market. The only 2 people who sell more vouchers and more training than us is the U.S. government, because they buy it for all of their military members and all of their contractors and government employees. And so they outsell us. And then Western Governors University, because they've got about 10,000 students per month going through CompTIA stuff as part of their degree programs. Those 2, on the educational side, WGU is #1. On the government side, obviously U.S. government's #1. And then on the commercial side, Dion Training is #1 as far as volume of people that we've helped. So as you mentioned earlier, we've helped 2 million students over the last 8 years get their certifications. And so I'm not against certifications, but if the certifications are no longer doing their job, which is what they used to be used for, was, I remember back in the late 90s when I got started in this, if you got your MSCE, which was the Microsoft Certified Systems Engineer, you would go through a class for maybe a month. You would get a couple of certifications from them, and you'd walk into a job making $100,000 a year, which today is like $200,000 a year. That kind of stuff doesn't exist anymore, right? But it's because we had so few people who were trained, and they're like, well, I know I need IT people. How do I find them? Well, you find the certification, and that's where you get it from, right? That's changed over the years. It went from certifications to degrees, then it became both. And now people are going, well, even if you have a certification and a degree, if without the experience, you're not valid to me. But so how do I see the industry changing? Well, the problem that I have with the industry is that most of the industry is still doing what I call a knowledge-based exam. It's ABCD questions. It's very much, what is the definition of this? Or here is a line of code. What type of attack was this, right? You go, oh, look, 1 = 1. That means it's an SQL injection. in the real world, SQL injections are never that easy, right? They're going to be base 64 encoded. They're going to be using different stuff. And so if you can only identify it because you see 1 equals 1, and I tell my students this all the time when they're studying for Security Plus or CISSP Plus, I'm like, anything that's a number equals a number and they're the same number, 1 equals 1, 7 equals 7, 17 equals 17, you know the answer is SQL injection. Don't even read the rest of the question, right?
Right.
But that's kind of the things that make us into paper tigers, right? I can identify keywords and know the right answer, even if I don't know the right answer or know how to get to the answer. And the industry as it's built today is really built around those knowledge-based exams. Why? Because it's worked for them for the last 30 years. Pearson A+ has been around since 1992. It's now 2024 as we're recording this.
Wow.
And so that's a 32-year-old certification. And I will tell you, I got my first A+ back in 1999, back on the old version 301, 302. And the test looks very similar to that. I mean, some things have changed, like the technology. We're no longer talking about Windows 95. We're no longer talking about Windows 3.1 or Windows 4.0 for servers. But it's still the same basic technology, right? If we talk about hard drives, those questions from the version 3 exam in 1999, I could still put them on the exam today and they still hold true, right? What is a 7,200 RPM drive versus a 10,000 RPM drive, and how does it work, and what's a block, and what's a sector, and blah, blah, blah. And so these things have not evolved with time as much as they should. The one big innovation we've seen is that CompTIA has added those performance-based questions. I know you said you took your CYSA, right? So at the beginning of your exam, you got 3 to 5 performance-based questions or simulations.
Those PBQs, yep.
Yeah, the PBQs, right? And even those, though, aren't really putting you into a real-world environment, right? They're just a simulation. And even some of the questions we have, like on the A+, it's literally a picture of a motherboard. And they might say, okay, where's the CPU? And you drag a label that says CPU onto the processor, or memory onto the memory modules, or SATA onto the SATA port, right? Does that really help you install or build a computer like A+ is supposed to test to? No, but it's what they can do in the current testing system, because they have this old testing system that's been used for 30 years. And mostly it was ABCD, and it wasn't until about 5 or 10 years ago they actually added these few simulation questions. The problem is the simulations are some of the best questions on the exam, but there's only 2 or 3 of them because it's expensive to create certifications that way. It's a lot easier to write an ABCD question. And there's a whole thing that goes into it, the way that they build certifications and why it is this way. But what Akylade is doing is changing that. And the reason we're able to change that pretty easily is because we are new, right? There's not a 30-year history with A+, because the challenge with these exams is it gets to the point where if you change something, people go, well, it's no longer valid because when I got my Security Plus, it was done this way. And now you're saying we're not going to have any knowledge-based questions and it's all going to be performance-based. Oh, I'm not sure that's really Security Plus anymore, right? And you even see this in CEH, Certified Ethical Hacker. They wanted to do so CEH was a 125 question, 4-hour ABCD knowledge-based exam. I always called it Security Plus with tools, because really it's, if you could pass Security Plus and then you can learn about 50 different tools and what they're used for, not even how to use the tool, but just the name of the tool and what it's used for, you can pass CEH. It really is Security Plus with a little extra. But what they've done is, Pen Test Plus came out and it had these PBQs plus all these knowledge-based questions, and CEH started losing market share because performance is better than non-performance, even if it was only 2 or 3 questions. And so they created the CEH Practical. So after you get your CEH, which is all knowledge-based, you can take a second test that is all hands-on labs. And if you pass that, now you have a CEH Practical, which is hands-on. I will tell you, the industry has not really accepted that. And I've never seen somebody on a job posting ask for a CEH Practical. It still just says CEH. So what happens is most people get the knowledge-based one and they never bother with the practical one. So like I'm a CEH. I've never done the practical one because I've never had a need. They introduced it after I stopped teaching CEH, so I haven't bothered with it. But I'm still a CEH and I'm still certified, even though my first time I got my CEH was 2009 and I just do my CEU. So how current am I really, right? And this is one of those problems with certifications. But so you see this move towards practicality, but they're all doing it in very small ways. Whereas with Akylade, because we don't have this 20-year, 30-year history, we built out our exam system ourselves. So we have the way to do performance-based testing at scale. We are currently developing certifications in 2025 that are coming out for incident response and SOC analysts. And so our SOC analyst certification we're having, the way it's going to look like is you're going to sit down in front of a computer, and for 2 hours while you're sitting at this computer, you're in front of a SIEM. You're in front of a security incident and event management system. And while you're there, things are going to be happening, right? It's going to have a replay of data feed that we've created over a 2-hour period. And so as you're taking the exam, things are happening. You're like, oh, that's, here's an inject. What does it look like? Oh, that one, based on it being 1 equals 1, that must be SQL injection. This one looks like an XML injection. This one is not bad at all. It's just a benign thing. We'll let it go. And you're marking those things as a level 1 entry-level SOC analyst, what do you do on a daily basis? You're looking at logs and events and deciding, is it malicious? Is it suspicious? Or is it benign? And if it is malicious, is it something you can fix? Or is it something that needs to be escalated to an incident responder? Or does it need to go to a tier 2 analyst to do a malware reverse engineering analysis or whatever it is? And that's what we're testing you on at the level 1 analyst exam, because we want you to be able to do the job. And if you can do that in our exam for 2 hours, well, guess what? When I put you in front of Security Onion on Monday at the real job, you can use it too, right? Because it's the same thing. Or even if I put you in front of Splunk or any of the other systems out there, there's a million seams. If you could do it in one, you can pretty much learn the other ones within about 24 hours. Give you 1 or 2 days, you'll spin up. But that's the difference between having somebody who comes from a practical background versus somebody who can answer questions on what is a seam? Because on Security Plus, that's the kind of question you get is, what is a seam? Not how do I use a seam? And that's really the big difference that we're trying to do. I think, and I'm putting my money where my mouth is here, right? The certification industry as a whole is going that direction, and they're going to have to go that direction. Going back to the Pentest Plus example, right? CEH, Pentest Plus, OSCP, those are the 3 certifications that are really well known for pen testing, right? CEH is still asked for more than anything else. Why? Because it first was introduced in 2000. It has a 24-year history. Pentest Plus is usually asked for second. That's 2018 is when it came out. It's been out for about 6 years, and it's making a really good progress and headway and taking a lot of market share from CEH. OSCP, if anybody who's taken OSCP would probably say it's the best hacking certification out there, because it's a 2-day hack where you actually do a penetration test. You hack through about 20 different machines, and then you write up a report based on what you found, just like you would as a real pen tester. The problem is most companies aren't asking for OSCP, especially the government and the DoD, because OSCP is not an ISO compliant exam. To make a certification exam that is really a certification and not just a certificate of completion, you have to have ISO 17024 compliance. And to do that, it's a big process you have to go through. We're doing that right now with Akylade. But if OSCP was ISO compliant, I think their sales would go up 3, 4, 5x overnight, and their impact in the industry would be much larger than it is. It's a great certification. It really tests the fact that you know what you're doing, because it is a fully performance-based exam, the way that Acylade is building our stuff. The difference is we're building ours with that ISO thing in mind to make sure that we are ISO certified, so we can put onto those government contracts. We can make it a requirement for employers, because now they know that this is something that is done in a fair and equitable way. Because the way you do ISO is you're bringing in industry experts. They are all coming together to say, what are we going to do on this exam, and how are we going to write these questions? Whereas otherwise, you can just have 2 guys in a room like me and Joseph decide to make the Jason and Joseph certification. It's just us creating exam questions and putting out to our audience. That is not industry standard. That is not the ISO process. It's not statistically valid. It hasn't done all the bias recognition, all those kind of things that need to go into it. And that's the biggest problem with OSCP currently, is they haven't done all that. So it's a great exam, but I would say it's probably not a certification. It's more of a certificate, because the way to prepare for it is taking their class. The way to take it is taking it through them. And all the questions were made by their company, not by the industry at large. And that's one of the big differences. So as a certification brand that we are building, we are really focused on performance, and we're really focused on doing it in the industry best practice way, which is following the ISO standard of 17024. And if you can do both of those things, I think that's the way the industry is going, is that you look up in 5 or 10 years, we're not going to have these ABCD questions anymore. It's all going to be performance-based testing. And the reason is we now have the technology where we can do this at scale. You go back 20 years ago, 30 years ago when A+ came out, you couldn't give somebody a virtual Windows machine and say, go configure, add a user or change permissions or set up a share drive or whatever. But nowadays, we can do all that very, very easily because of cloud computing. And so why hasn't the rest of the certification industry caught up to that? I think it's just because they're still stuck in their ways, because they have 30 years of history, right? And so a new player can just kind of leapfrog that and start again. It's the same thing if you look at electric cars, right? What did Tesla do? They started a whole brand new car company with Teslas, right? Could GM have done that? Sure. But there wasn't the motivation, because we're already selling gas-powered cars and it's selling really well. Why do we want to cannibalize our own sales by making electric vehicles? And once Tesla came to the market and started becoming popular, then all of a sudden everybody else started going, oh, we should probably make an electric car too, right? And that's what's happened, right? And I think it's going to be the same thing. I think, even if Akylade doesn't become the name that everybody knows like CompTIA, and we become the #1 performance-based tester in the world or whatever, which we would love to do, I think us being in the marketplace and us showing that this works and can be done in an ISO compliant way, I think CompTIA will start making those type of exams too. I think CEH will start making those type of exams too. And so what my goal is really to change the industry, whether I'm the one benefiting from that monetarily because people buy my cert or because they buy somebody else's. I honestly don't care as much. And I know it's a horrible thing to say as a founder and a C-level executive in a certification brand, But really, I'm in this because I want to change the industry for the better. I want to have a way that candidates who don't have the experience can go study, they can go learn, they can get the experience that way, and then prove that experience with an exam that employers will accept. Because otherwise, we're in the same problem we're having, where there's 10 to 20 feeder people coming in trying to fill 50 roles. How do you hire 50 people when there's only 20 coming in at the entry level? You can't. And we're all going to end up just bidding up prices on labor, which is not good for the industry. We're going to make sure we don't have enough people, and we're still fighting. I mean, I have friends in the cybersecurity industry, and you look at large, people have a CISSP, the unemployment rate is negative for people with a CISSP, right? Because it's asked for more on jobs than there are people who are actually certified. The last time I checked, there was around 100,000 people in the world, 120,000 people in the world who needed CISSP. And there's currently around 150,000 to 200,000 jobs asking for CISSP. So we're never going to be able to fill it. On the other hand, if you get a Security Plus, and that's where a lot of people get frustrated, there are 5 Security Plus certified people for every 1 job posting in the US, because those are more entry level, right? And so this becomes the challenge: is how do we get more entry level positions? And and the other thing that frustrates me is you look at some of these jobs that are entry level and they ask for 5 years of experience in a CISSP. That's not entry level, folks. That's intermediate at that point, right? And so there's this disconnect between the industry and what the population is that's filling these jobs. And we as an industry need to come to terms with this and figure out, okay, we're never going to be able to get enough people with experience. So how do we make this into a way where we can build that experience and take that risk on some of these people? And the best way to do that is with some kind of a certification that is performance-based. So they're studying and proving it on their own, and then they're demonstrating it in an environment. And now we know they have at least that baseline level of skill that they can do something for me day one, and I can build upon that and then give them up to the higher levels I need later.
So, so as you mentioned, eliminating the paper tigers from the cybersecurity industry. Can you, I guess, elaborate a bit on this concept and how Akylade certification approach addresses this issue?
Yeah. So when we talk about paper tigers, when I use that term and when my other industry friends use that term, what we're talking about is, and if you've ever been a hiring manager, I'm sure you've seen this, right? I'm looking at the resume and I get this person and says, oh, look, here's, Mr. Joseph. And I look at Mr. Joseph, and Mr. Joseph has 40 certifications. He's never worked in IT at all, right? He's never worked in cyber at all, but he just spent the last 6 months going and taking a whole bunch of tests. And so I've seen a lot of people come out with a master's degree in cybersecurity because they're 23 years old. They went and got their bachelor's, their master's. They've got 30 or 40 certifications, and they're trying to get their first job. And these people are taking anywhere from 3 to 12 months to find a job because most people don't want to take a chance on somebody who is unproven. And so it goes back to, I need experience. Well, how do you get experience, right? Well, paper tigers don't have experience. They just have a bunch of certifications out their name. And what's happened is, in the old days, people would see them and go, oh, this person must be really smart. They've got 20 plus certifications. Let me hire them because at least they have the knowledge. And then they show up to work and they can't do anything, right? Because they've never learned how to do anything. They just know how to read a book, study, and pass an exam. I can pass any certification you give me in a week or less, right? Give me a textbook, give me 4 days. I will read the book. I'll take the test on Friday and I will pass it. I've done it every single time with all my certifications. I have failed 1 certification exam in the 25 years I've taken them. And that one was one because the wording on it was really, really bad. It was more of an English test than a technology test, to be quite honest, because it was written by a British company and they use it was like PhD level writing for a test that was entry level, and it made no sense to me. But that's neither here nor there.
Right.
But the point is with paper tigers is, there's a lot of people that can study and get a degree. They can study and get a certification, but they can't actually do the job. And so what we're trying to do is create more of this performance-based testing, because the thing with the way an Acylade certification is built, we use that SOC analyst one that I was giving you an example of that's currently in alpha as we're developing it for next year. Could you study? If you're studying to pass my exam and it's performance-based exam where you have to identify different content coming into your SIEM, well, does it really matter if you memorize my answers or not? Well, no, because you can't memorize the answers because the answers are going to change each time. But you have to memorize the process. Well, if you memorize the process, guess what? You're doing the job. That's really the difference, right? Whereas Security Plus, if I memorize 1 = 1, that's not telling me how to do the job. It's just telling me how to bypass the exam and get through it. And that's what happens with paper tigers is they find the ways to pass these exams. We all know cheating happens, right? And if you're in a knowledge-based exam, cheating can happen very easily because you can go online. I'm not going to say the websites now, but there are plenty of websites online that have brain dumps of the exam questions, right? And there are lots of them, and you should not use them because if you do, you're only cheating yourself. Because yes, I can go download a PDF that has 500 questions that were real questions on the exam as of last week. I can memorize those and take the exam and pass it. Great. But you hire me, I'm not going to be able to do the job. And
Right.
that's going to now, it means that you suck as the candidate because you can't do the job. And now what's happening is the industry starts saying, well, the last 3 people I hired with, name a certification, Security Plus, CEH, whatever, I hired them and they couldn't do the job. So guess what? I don't care about these certifications anymore. They're useless. And that's why we got a lot of people going, I'm not even going to hire people with certifications, right? And that degrades the whole industry. So the whole idea of eliminating these paper tigers, the only way to do that is to create it at doing it as performance-based testing like OSCP has. Because if you pass OSCP, I know you can hack, right? If you pass CEH, I know you can answer ABCD questions. And that's a true difference, right? Paper tigers can answer questions, but they can't do work. People who are actually certified and actually have taken the time to learn the tools can do it. And this is one of the things that I've gotten into a fight with some of the leaders at CompTIA. They're like, well, yeah, all of our training has hands-on labs. All of our training has this. We have practices with this. I'm like, yes, but your real certs don't. And that's the problem is not everybody who is Security Plus certified has gone through the CompTIA training. They could have read a book. They could have, downloaded the questions. They could have gone to a boot camp. And so what we need is the certification should indicate you have this level of quality. But if the quality is only in the training, but anybody can take the certification without the training, then that doesn't mean that if you have the certification, you have that knowledge and experience, right? And that's the difference between a paper tiger certification versus a performance-based certification. And that's why we're going that direction.
Gotcha. And I guess a bit of a follow-up to that. How would you describe, or how would you compare Akylade to what's currently out right now? Like, so let's say like try Hack Me or Hack the Box. Would you say it's something like that, or better, or kind of in that arena?
So it's a great point, right? Try Hack Me and Hack the Box. Both great ways to show you can do stuff, right? If you can hack a box on Try Hack Me, you probably have the level of equivalent of an entry-level penetration tester, which is great. The problem is there's not a certification with that. And so there's nothing that prevents me, even if I went and downloaded my history from Hack the Box and said, oh, look, here's the 100 machines I've done, and I give that to a hiring manager, that's great. But to the hiring manager, one of the things we're going to be thinking is, did Joseph actually do that? Or did Jason log in as Joseph and do it for him, right? In a certification, you're being watched by a live proctor. We know it's you. We validated your passport or your driver's license versus your face and your identity when you log in for the exam. You then sit down and take the exam. They're over your shoulder virtually. They're watching your screen. They're seeing what you do. So we are validating, yes, you can hack this box, and we've seen you do it, right? Whereas if I just go and hack the box, nothing says it wasn't me. It wasn't me looking with Google. It wasn't me having ChatGPT help. It wasn't me and my buddy Joseph sitting next to me who actually knows what he's doing. And so I'm getting credit for the stuff he did, and that leads to paper tigers.
It could have been someone completely different logged in as, your account and take it.
And that's the difference between a certificate or a training program. Like Hack the Box is really a training program, right? It's not a certification. Could they make a certification? Yeah, they totally could, but they haven't. And so, one of the things we've thought about is reaching out to them going, hey, we know how to do ISO related certifications. You know how to make really good quality training in boxes. Why don't we work together to make a Hack the Box type certification where people can go to you and get training, and then they can come to us and prove they've learned what they did. Because if you have a box that's like, hey, go after an Apache web server and break in, right? Well, we might have one that's go after an NGINX server, or we might have one that's going after IIS, right? So we have different questions, but similar stuff. But it still shows that if you learned over here, you can do it over here on the exam. So that's really the big difference between that. And so as we look at performance-based, there is performance-based training, there's performance-based testing, and then there are performance-based certifications. And really, we're trying to be in that certification level because that becomes the gold standard that is proving the knowledge you've done to get yourself ready for that exam.
Awesome. So drawing from your experience as a network engineer and information systems officer, how do you ensure that Akylade's certifications remain practical and relevant to real-world cybersecurity challenges?
Yeah, exactly. And this goes back to doing it under the ISO 17024 process. So the 17024 process is called the Personnel Certification Standards process. And whether you're doing a cybersecurity certification or a food cleanliness and safety certification, any certification you want to do in the world should be following this process. And basically, there's a handful of steps you have to do to create a certification using this process. The first thing you do is what's called a JTA, or Job Task Analysis. And so I mentioned earlier, we have an advisory council we call the AGCO, and this has experts who are in the field. These are people who are working in the field. These are people who are executives or vice presidents, or people who are hiring managers, or people even just who have been doing this for 15 or 20 years in the field working, like me, who's been a network engineer, information systems officer, a CIO, a network operations center director and things like that. You get these people and we put them all in a room, either virtually or in an actual room. Generally, we do this over Zoom. And we say, okay, we want to create a certification. What are the 5 biggest problems you're having in your industry, right? And so we get a whole list, and we've got a list of about 20 different things. And based on what all these people are saying are problems, one of the biggest ones we have is SOC analysts. We can't find qualified SOC analysts because everybody is asking for 3 to 5 years of experience. And even then, if you are a system admin for 3 or 5 years, it doesn't mean you know how to be a SOC analyst, right? And so they said, here's the titles of the jobs we want. Then we go and pick one of those, and that's what the certification is going to be on. So let's use the example of a SOC analyst, right? Or actually, I'll use the example of AI security, right? Because AI is really big these days. And our next certification actually this week coming out is the beta for our AI security foundation exam. And then we have an AI security practitioner exam coming out later this year.
Okay.
So in that exam, we say, okay, what title are we trying to test to? And they say, well, we want an AI security consultant. Okay. What are the job tasks that an AI security consultant has to do? And all these people come up with what are those tasks, right? And we have a small group of SMEs that does this, and they come up with the 100 to 200 tasks that are associated with that job role. It may be you need to explain to stakeholders the importance of AI security, understand which regulations are affecting AI security practices in your organization, be able to configure an AI data loss prevention system, blah, 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 blah. And you list all these different tasks down. Then we do what's called the JTA survey. And that survey goes out to generally a couple of hundred to a couple of thousand people who are doing this job in the industry. And so if we're using SOC analysts, I would find a whole bunch of SOC analysts out there who have at least 3 to 5 years of experience. And they're going to go through this. And for each of those tasks, they're going to say on a scale of 1 to 5, how important is it? Not important at all to this is the most important thing I ever do in my job. Right. And you list out for each of these tasks. In addition to that, they say, how frequently do they do this? Is this something I do every day, every week, every quarter, every month, every year, or not frequently at all, like as needed? And based on that, the psychometrician comes in, who's a PhD statistician, and then does a data configuration analysis to go, okay, based on all the results of these thousands of surveys we've done for this job role out of these 200 tasks, these are the 137 that are the most important, or 173 that are the most important, whatever it happens to be, and in this order. Those then get turned into the objectives and the domains for the exam, and we decide that domain 1 is going to be 20%, domain 2 is going to be 23%, and these objectives have these main questions, and this is the level of difficulty. Once you have that, then you can go and write the questions for the exam. And for every question that's written, they have to be experts in the field who have been doing this in the real world. Every question that's written, let's say you write a question, Joseph, as soon as you finish writing it, well, then Alfredo might look at it, and then I would look at it. And as long as 2 SMEs agreed that it was right, that question goes into the test bank. If either of us disagrees, it gets kicked back to you to revise, and 2 more SMEs have to look at it. So this is how you maintain that quality control, making sure there's no bias in the question, making sure there's no trickery to the question, making sure there's no throwaway answers. Because I've seen people, like on a Security Plus exam once, on a practice exam, I saw one of the answers as the Death Star, right? That's not a real computer thing, right? We all know that's garbage. Throw it away, right? So you don't want that, right? So if I'm talking about, what are the 5 components of security? Well, confidentiality, integrity, availability, non-repudiation, and authentication. Those are the 5. 4 of those should be the ABCD answers, and one of those would be correct, right? I wouldn't throw in something like privacy, because we all know that's not part of the CIA NA triad, right? Or Pentagon.
Right.
And so this is all the kind of stuff that goes into it. Then once you get those questions written, then you go into a beta exam. And as part of the beta exam, you have to get, hundreds of people to take this exam. And then based on them taking the exam, we then get all those results back. And as we wrote all those questions, if you wrote a question, you'd say, I think that 70% of the candidates are going to get this right. And then as a SME, when I look at it, I go, well, I think 65. And somebody else may say, oh, I think only 20%. And if we're more than about 10% off on those 3 SMEs, that question has to get reevaluated by other SMEs, because we have to be in agreement of what we think it's going to be. And then when the beta happens, that question, if we thought it was 70% on average was going to get it right, but only 20% got it right, well, we need to rework that question, because we're not hitting the target we were writing it for. If 100% of the people got it right, that's not good either. That means the question's too easy, right? If less than 25% are getting it right, it's too hard. If more than, let's say 90% are getting it right, it's too easy. And you try to rebuild these questions so you get a valid exam. Once you do all that, the statistician comes in, we do what's called an Angoff study, and we do a standard set, and it says, okay, out of the 90 questions on the Security Plus exam, if you got at least, 73 questions right, you pass the exam, and that equates to a 750 out of 900, or whatever that scaling is. And then the exam goes live. So all that has to be done for it to be a valid certification under the ISO process. It makes sure that everything is valid, that is relevant to the job. And going back to the practicality piece, we do that not because Jason thinks it's practical, but because the SMEs that created these job tasks said these are the things that somebody needs to do this work role. This is how we maintain practicality. Now, Can you answer these with ABCD questions? Sure. Can you answer them with hands-on performance? Sure. Either way could be done. We just believe that more performance-based testing or case study-based testing makes more sense than using just ABCD questions, because ABCD questions are too easy to just pump and dump, study and regurgitate, and therefore you get those paper tigers.
So, and yeah, thank you for that. So given your success in teaching students globally, like what advice would you give aspiring cybersecurity professionals about balancing theoretical knowledge with the hands-on experience in today's, rapidly evolving threat landscape?
Yeah, I would say two things. One is when you're going to study for a certification, and particularly a performance-based certification, you have to know how to do the thing, right? Because that's what you're being tested on. Let me, so if you're studying for an Acylade certification, you're going to have to be able to do the thing, or you will not pass the exam. So it's kind of easy that way. Is you really got to focus on your practical knowledge, not just your theory. Now, let me put on my other hat. If you're taking a certification of what's currently exists today, a Security Plus, a CISA, a Pen Test Plus. I'll use Pen Test Plus as an example. This is a great example for it, because Pen Test Plus is a penetration testing certification from CompTIA. You get 3 to 5 performance-based questions on the exam where you might be asked to do an Nmap scan, or look at a result and figure out what the vulnerability is, or perform an attack using, I don't know, Aircrack NG or something like that in a virtual environment, and then the rest are all ABCD. Well, as you take your Pen Test Plus exam and you look at the objectives, there's about 35 to 45 different tools that are mentioned in the exam. Now, for the exam, if you know what the tool is and you know what it does, that's usually enough to pass the exam. So, for example, if I asked you a question on doing something like a web application attack and which tool would you use to perform that, the answer is probably something like Burp Suite, right? Because Burp Suite is a man-in-the-middle or a browser-in-the-middle proxy that you can use as you're doing this type of testing. Well, on the exam for Pen Test Plus, you never had to open Burp Suite in your life. You may never have touched that tool. But if you can remember Burp Suite, web application vulnerability testing, you're going to get that question right? It's that simple, right? So what I would tell you is when you're trying to focus on theoretical knowledge, it's knowing that Burp Suite is a web application vulnerability testing tool. But if you're trying to do hands-on experience, what you should do is you should spin up a lab and you should use Burp Suite. Now, should you be an expert in Burp Suite to pass Pen Test Plus? No. But I think if you at least went into an environment and did it for an hour and played with it, and you brought up a web server and tried to do an attack and saw how it works. And in my courses, I do these type of demonstrations to show students the practicality of it. But I can throw away all those demonstrations from my course and you'll still pass the exam. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's the difference between a theoretical exam and a performance-based exam. So one of the things I always tell aspiring professionals is even if you're going for these knowledge-based exams like Pen Test Plus, take the time to play with each of those tools. Spend 30 minutes on it, or go watch a YouTube video on it for 30 minutes. And like I said, this can be very time consuming because there's 35 to 40 different tools out there. And one of those they list is Metasploit. Well, Metasploit, you could literally spend 10, 20, 30 hours playing in Metasploit and just scratching the surface of what it can do, right? And so, you could really study forever to try to get practical. But the reason why it's important to start getting at least a little hands-on environment here is if you get into the interview, right? And I'm a hiring manager and I decided to give you a shot because you had enough experience or you had Pen Test Plus on your certification on your resume. And I bring you in and I start saying, okay, so tell me, how would you do a web application vulnerability scan? If you could just say, well, I would use Nessus. Well, yeah, that's like 1 point out of 100. Now tell me, what does it look like when you do that? I don't know. I've never opened it. Okay, you can't do the job. Next interview, right? Or if you could say, well, in my home lab, I pulled up Nessus and I did a scan and I found this, and I was able to, I was looking for this particular part of the vulnerability scan. So I only looked at web applications. So I only looked at port 80 and port 443, or I looked at my entire network. So I only have 3 clients, and here's all the things I found. And you can talk about this and how you scan, how you do remediation, how you do a pen test, and you've actually used these tools at least a little bit. That shows me, A, you're more than just knowledge. You have a little bit of practicality. And B, you're actually hungry and you like doing this stuff because no one forced you to go pull out Nmap or Burp Suite or SQL Map and play with it to pass the Pen Test Plus exam. But instead, you took the onus on yourself, right? So that's one of the things. The other thing I would say for aspiring professionals is anytime you can find something that can give you experience, even if it's not I'm on the job for a year. For instance, if you're doing pen testing, go sign up for CTFs, capture the flags. There's ctftime.org is a great website. There's always CTFs running pretty much all the time. 99% of them are virtual. You can do them from home. So right now we're talking, it's a Saturday as you and I are filming this. We could get off this and I can go play in a CTF for 2 hours. And if I score, let's say I'm in the top 5, right? I could put that on my resume. Scored number 5 in the Christmas Challenge 2024, blah, 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 CTF, right? That tells an employer, not only do I pass exams, but I can actually do something. right?
Right.
And that's another way to show experience and try to break down this barrier, because right now, experience is the number one barrier holding people back from cybersecurity jobs, because most companies are not willing to take a chance on somebody who doesn't have demonstrated, documented experience, because they've been burned too much by people who just have certifications. And so is devaluing certifications in the mind of hiring managers currently. Now, does that mean you shouldn't get certifications? No, it doesn't, because if you don't have it, you still won't even get through ATS, because the system is still looking for those certifications. But just realize having a certification doesn't mean you're going to get hired. Having a certification and some kind of demonstrated experience, now you've got a chance, right? Now you can actually work through that.
Exactly, and that's the difference. As I mentioned, explaining earlier, like just speak with my mentees, and one of the things, as everyone is pursuing like Security Plus, for example, what is going to separate you when your resume is in front of a hiring manager? It can't just be, okay, so you have 10 resumes that have Security Plus, but that one resume says Security Plus, and maybe they started their own home lab, or they have their own blog or website that can demonstrate, the work that they've done. So like I said, that hiring manager is going to spend, okay, this is the person I really want to interview, or maybe even bring on, because amongst all these other resumes, this is the one that actually did something, and I feel better about this candidate than everyone else. So yeah, I'm definitely with you on that. I think that's the differentiator. Yep.
Yeah, and definitely. And the other thing I would tell you is, don't just put in resumes and think that's going to get you a job, right?
Yeah.
Most jobs are found through your network, not through going in through the front door through LinkedIn. These days, it is so easy to just click the apply now button on LinkedIn that employers are getting flooded with resumes. And so if I have 1,000 candidates, I have a relatively small company at Dion Training. We've got about 40 people. The last couple of jobs we put out, we've had anywhere from 500 to 1,000 people applying for those jobs, right? And we're hiring, one person a quarter, right? So out of 1,000 people, there's a lot of great candidates, but I'm only choosing one, right? And so your chances are 1 in 1,000 of getting that job, right? And so it may take you 1,000 resumes to get one, because like I said, I'm getting 1,000 job applicants for every posting I'm doing. But if, like, Joseph knows somebody who's one of his mentees, and he's like, oh, Jason, I know you're hiring for a new, I don't know, penetration tester. I got this guy that I've been working with for a year and a half, and he's done all these capture the flags, and he's got this cert and that cert. He doesn't have the experience yet because nobody's giving him a shot, but I think he'd be really great. Maybe you should take a chance on him. It's not guaranteed that person's getting a job, but I'll guarantee he's going to get an interview, right? And when I interview, I'm interviewing 5 or 10 people. So out of the 1,000, I'm cutting that down to, the ones that my system has an automatic ATS. It'll go through, it'll chop that down to a reasonable number, like 50 or 100 that we actually look at the resumes for. Out of those 50 or 100, I choose the 10 best ones, and those are the ones I'm going to spend that 30-minute interview with. And based on that, 2 or 3 of those will make it to the second round, and that's where we dive a little bit deeper. But if you had somebody you recommended, and I know you and I trust you, and Joseph says, hey, man, I got this guy, Mike, and he's just awesome. Or I got this lady, Mary, and she's really awesome. I'm going to at least get hers into the stack of, okay, out of those 10 interviews, I might add 1 or 2 that are personal recommendations, and I'll compare them to the other ones I've selected. And if, at least now you've got a 10% chance, 1 in 10 versus a 1 in 1,000 chance, right? So use your personal networks, find these things, and find people in those organizations who can advocate for you, because that's where you're going to find most of your job opportunities, because it helps circumvent this funneling process. Instead of coming at the top of the funnel, you're kind of coming in right in the middle towards the end, and you've already passed the resume review, and now it's the interview. And if you can do well in the interview, then it's a matter of negotiation to get that job offer.
And that's a big step too. Being able to, as you mentioned, to not have to, contend with that big number early on, and you can kind of cut to it, get to the interview portion of it, and then from there you got to shoot your shot, while you're there. That now it's your time to show and prove, and then take it from there. So no, that's definitely a big deal. And I always tell folks the same thing. Network, develop, expand your networks. That's a big part of it as well.
And when it comes to, like I said, the number one thing people are looking for is experience. Now, experience most of the time looks like, I've been in this job for X amount of years. Now, if you don't have a job yet because you're coming in from a different area, then you need to find other ways to give experience, right? And that could be, I'm volunteering as the network security person for my church. I am helping Boy Scouts get their cybersecurity badge, because there's actually a cybersecurity badge now, and you can go work with Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts and help them get it and put that on your resume. Like, I was a youth volunteer, right? You've got a bunch of people you mentor. That's experience, right? All these things are things you can do, because sometimes, people don't want to take a chance. And the biggest problem we have with cybersecurity is an entry-level cybersecurity job is roughly $80 to $120,000 a year in most places in the country. That's a pretty big salary to give somebody as an entry level, which is why they're expecting some kind of previous experience. If we were paying $12 an hour for SOC analysts, we probably would be more like McDonald's, and we would hire somebody off the street, give them a week or two of training, and then say, okay, you're now a SOC analyst. But because we're paying these higher salaries, employers want somebody who's value add from day one. Otherwise, that's a huge amount of money I'm spending every week just to have you on there. If you're making $120,000 a year, that's $10,000 per month that it's costing the company, right?
Right.
That's $2,500 a week. So if I have to train you for 4 weeks, it costs me $10,000. If I have to train you for 2 months, that's $20,000. And if you don't work out, now I've got to fire you and go through the whole hiring process again and do it all over again. And it's very expensive to make a bad hire, which is why they rely so heavily on experience. So find ways to get experience, whether it's through volunteering, getting a job that is somewhat related to IT or cybersecurity in some way. I had one person I was working with. She was trying to break into cybersecurity because she wanted to be a pen tester. Her background was marketing. She had a master's degree in marketing. So we helped her rewrite her resume and highlight all her cyber experience. Nobody was going to hire her as a pen tester from day one, but we found a pen test company that was willing to hire her as one of their marketing people. And because she was there, like, well, you can do value added work for us on the marketing side, which we need. And what we'll do is 5 or 10 hours a week, we'll let you play with the pen testers too. And over the next 6 to 12 months, she got more and more on the pen testing and less on the marketing. After a year, she was a full pen tester, right? But during that year of training, they were getting a master's degree marketer helping them do the marketing they needed for their business. And so it was a win-win for both of them. But those kind of things are a little bit harder. And what I call that is the two-step, right? You're going from whatever career you're in. If you're a bookkeeper or a CPA, you can go become an IT auditor because that's the same skill set. And then from there, you might be able to pivot into a more technical thing like Pen Test Plus. And so even though or pen testing, for example, right? You may not be able to go right from being a bookkeeper to a pen tester, but you can go bookkeeping to auditing to pen testing. And so finding ways to leverage your existing experience and those transferable skills can also really help you be able to get close to what you want to do and then move internally to that organization.
That's great advice. Awesome. I hope everyone listening taking notes. Again, we have Jason Dion here on the Cyber Coffee Hour, part of the Alive Podcast Network. As we transition here to the back half here of the episode, just learn a little bit more about Jason and some of the things he likes to do in his spare time and things like that. So first, Jason, so what was like the first piece of technology that sparked your interest in cyber?
So, the first piece of technology that I used that really got me into this whole thing, I'm going to really date myself here. Those who are watching the video version, you can probably see I got a little bit of gray beard going on. I'm only 44, but I've been doing this for a long, long time. I got my first computer when I was 6 years old in 1986. And it was a Color Computer 3. Which was a Tandy Color Computer 3, which Tandy doesn't even exist anymore. You used to buy them at Radio Shack, right? And you took and when you bought this thing, it was basically a disk drive, if they had one. There was no hard drive. It was a keyboard, and you plugged it into a TV using the three, the red, yellow, white cable, the white, red, and yellow cables, right? It's like the old Nintendo days, right? And you put channel 3 on your TV, and that was your computer monitor. I mean, this is old days, right? 1986, and back in those days, if you wanted to even use a computer, you had to be kind of technically literate. So I had to learn some basic things like coding and programming to be able to run the games and run the things I wanted to do. And there was a game, I remember it was a Mickey Mouse game, and it was to teach you your alphabet, right? And like math and reading and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And to run that game, literally, it was on a cassette tape. And you put it in the cassette tape player, you typed in the command, and when you were getting ready to hit enter, you had to hit play at the same time because it was basically read from tape, and it would read it off that analog tape, the code to run the Mickey Mouse program. Because this is before we even had the 5 1/4 floppy disks. Right. So I've been doing this for a little while, right? But that really got me started in this because I had to learn some basic coding to be able to play my game. And then, over the years, I started making my own games and I started programming. And by the time I left high school, I programmed in 15 languages. I had started a company doing website programming and network engineering and penetration testing down in the Fort Lauderdale, Miami area. This was late 90s, early 2000s. And really, it kind of got me on that path. But I've always kind of been a tinkerer and a nerd. And I think it was that Tandy Color Computer 3 that really got me started. And so I was doing cybersecurity before it was called cybersecurity. I mean, the term cybersecurity as we use it today was really around 2010. Before that, we called it information assurance. And before that, we called it information security, right?
Yeah.
And so when I was doing it, it was information security back in the late 90s. But I got into it from the help desk side, and I was helping small and medium-sized businesses because they didn't have an IT department. One of the places I worked at was a small real estate office, and they had about 20 realtors in the firm. And they literally would pay me $50 an hour to go with them to Best Buy and help them pick out what computers they need to buy for the office. And they would pay me to set up their networks and their printer shares and their file shares and all that kind of stuff. And that's really how I kind of got into this. And then it kind of expanded, and I went to larger and larger organizations. Like I said, my last organization was 1 million endpoints across 6 continents and 40 plus countries, right? One of the largest networks in the world is one of the ones I was running. And so like it's always been like step by step to get there. I didn't go immediately and get hired at Microsoft as, a CIO, right? I started out as help desk and then field service and then network engineering and system administration. And then I started doing penetration testing. I started doing vulnerability assessments. I started doing disaster recovery and incident response. And I've kind of touched all these different jobs throughout my career over the last 25, 30 years. My first, paid job, I was 15 years old in 1995. And so I've been doing this almost 30 years at this point. And I've done a lot of different jobs. So I think the biggest thing is finding technology that's interesting. And, there's something to be said for some of these old technology pieces because you really learned how it goes. And so, people are like, man, you know a lot about IT and cyber. I'm like, well, yeah, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've grown with the industry. Could you start all that today from zero? It'd be really hard, right? But we also have a lot of better tools now. Hack the box and things like that. That didn't exist back in the 90s, right? When I was doing hacking, I literally had a room with 5 or 10 different PCs all linked together on a LAN. And then I had my attack machine and I would try to hack my way through that. Nowadays, you can do all that in the cloud or a virtual machine on one laptop and take it with you wherever you are in the world. So I think it's easier nowadays to learn some of that stuff. But there's also so much more and so much complexity versus the attacks and stuff we were doing 20, 30 years ago.
What are some key challenges you face in your journey to success and how you overcame them?
I think the biggest challenge, especially early on, was convincing people that they needed cyber and they needed security, right? I was mentioning I had my company in 99 through 2001. I sold it in early 2002 and joined the military. After 9/11 happened, I decided to sell my company and join the military. But one of the challenges back then that I really had was convincing people they actually needed this stuff. And even up to a couple of years ago, everyone always looked at IT and cyber as a cost center. It was something that cost our business money. It wasn't something that enabled business functionality that made us money. And that's a really hard place to be. Because if you're in a large organization, let's say you're in a big company that's got a couple thousand employees, and you're saying, hey, I need $500 million to go build out this really secure computer network. To them, that's a $500 million investment. They're losing $500 million. If I said, I want to get $500 million to go build a new factory to produce new widgets that's going to be selling and making us money, that's a little bit easier for them to swallow because it's something that's going to lead to money being generated. But cyber has always been sold as this cost center. It costs us money to do cyber. It costs us money to do IT. Think of all the subscriptions we have on a daily basis with Office 365 and Google Workspaces and video streaming and Zoom and all that stuff, right? I mean, one of the biggest expenses we have in businesses now is all these subscriptions and all the cloud services and stuff, right? But that's one of the biggest challenges is how do you figure out how to couch the discussion to get the money you need to do your job? And so that's always been one of the challenges. I've been very fortunate in that I figured that out pretty early. And when I started becoming a manager, I started realizing that even though I was a technical manager because I was an information systems officer, right? I had a couple hundred people working for me. I was in charge of all the networks for the unit I was at. But everybody who was my boss, they were not technical people. They didn't understand. I mean, they knew how to use email, but that was about it. I mean, and we're even talking something like the 2000s to 2010 period, right? That was when I first was a director for information systems. And I started learning, I need to stop talking in tech and I need to start talking in the language of business. And the language of business is money and risk, right? It's all about time, money, and resources. And so when I learned that really shifted. And it got to the point where I could ask for money for anything if I couched it in that way. One of the projects I did, it was going to cost $1 million to do a exercise. And most organizations will do a tabletop exercise, right? Where you just go, okay, here's what we're going to do. And if we get hacked, we're going to do this, and then we'll do this, and then we'll do this. Well, this was a large organization, and they were doing these exercises every year. They were doing a lot of war games because working with the government and the military. But they never, ever did it on the cyber side. Every time it was a cyber inject, like, oh, we're being hacked by the North Koreans or the Russians or whatever, they would go, okay, and we did this action and we're done. White card, move on to the next thing because they don't want to disrupt the operational networks. Well, I went and made the business case of, look, we need to stop white carding all this because that's theoretical knowledge. We need practical knowledge. Our IT folks need a chance to practice their skills too, like shifting from one data center to another. and making sure we can still carry the load. Well, we've done all the work and we know in theory how it's going to work. So we're not going to do that because, one day when it's real, then we will. Well, if you wait till the day it's real, guess what? You're not going to know what you're doing because things go wrong, and things you thought were going to happen didn't happen the way you wanted. So I convinced them we needed this money. They gave us $1 million. This was a worldwide exercise across, half the globe. We had to fly people all over the place for white cell and all that kind of stuff, but we did it. And that was back in 2017, 2018. And ever since, they do it every single year now because they realize, oh my God, there was so much value in doing this thing for real and not just doing it as a tabletop, right? But the first time people said, I need $1 million, they're like, what do you mean you need $1 million for this? Why can't we just white card it? It's free to white card it, right? They're like, well, no, you're not going to get the value add. And I know $1 million sounds like a lot, but when we're talking about government budgets, that's really a rounding error. But to get that money was really, really difficult. But we had to convince them of this is a business need. This isn't because the cyber guys need it. This is something you need because you need to know that if we are attacked or this bad thing happens, we can shift networks. We can survive through. We can have cyber resilience, not just cybersecurity where we're trying to protect everything. We're protecting the right things and we're able to keep running our operations because if we're in the middle of a war, the first thing the bad guys are going to do is they're going to try to take out our satellite communication and our computer networks because if you can't talk, you can't fight, right? And so how do we survive through that? How do we keep fighting? And that's what we really focused on, right? And so, when you talk about challenges, especially as new people, learn the language of business, right? It's money, it's time, it's resources, it's people, and most importantly, it's risk. If you can't couch things in terms of risk, you are never going to be successful as a cyber person because as a cyber person, what we do every day is we understand risk and we mitigate that risk down to an acceptable level so we can keep operating. The other thing I think is one of the key challenges is a lot of people think they need to protect everything. And if you try to protect everything, you're protecting nothing. Right. And so think about your house. You've got all your doors, your windows, your air vents. If I want to break into Joseph's house, I can do that. I might go around until I find an open door, but if they're all locked, I'm going to have to break into one of them. But at some point, I'm going to find what is the weakest thing if I'm really dedicated in getting in. Now, hopefully, and this is where we go in cyber, is if I can protect myself enough, if I'm Joseph's house, I've locked it up enough and I'm trying every door. I'm like, oh, it's all locked. And I go, you know what? His neighbor's house left the back door unlocked. I'll just go in the neighbor's house instead, right?
Exactly.
It's easier, right? But if you're all equally secured, well, then I'm going to have to break into somewhere and maybe I'm going to still go after your house. And so as cyber folks, it's important for us to rack and stack, make things difficult for an attacker, but realize you can't protect everything. There are areas of your network that are going to get compromised. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. We are all going to get compromised at some point. But what is an acceptable level of compromise? Do I want them to get into my credit card system or do I want them to get into my top secret recipe for Coca-Cola system, right? Or do I want them to get into my public repository of assets on social media? Well, heck, I'd rather them be on that one because they're already public anyway, right? And so you figure out where am I going to put my resources. My top secret formula, it's going to get the most resources. My credit card data, it's going to get enough resources that I'm meeting all regulatory requirements and hopefully don't get breached. And then, this public data store, I don't care. I can protect that or not protect it. If I had to choose, that's the least important. And understanding that in terms of risk and being able to make those decisions is really going to be your key strength moving forward. And it's something I learned early in my career that helped me really succeed as I move forward.
So with all that, and as you work through your career, what would you say is your favorite coffee that gets you through the day?
So I'm not a huge coffee person, actually. I actually had coffee today as we were talking here. And the only real coffee I drink is the really sweet, delicious coffees. So, I have these, the cafe lattes, that come like already, it's a Japanese brand and, they come like already made. You just shake it, pop it and drink it. And they're really delicious, but they're all full of sugar and milk and chocolate. Generally, what I drink is I'm a soda guy, which is horrible, I know, but I've at least moved to Coke Zero at this point instead of regular Coke.
So it's an upgrade.
So it's at least it's not all the fat and calories, but I got my Coke Zero here as well.
Right.
Cause I already finished my coffee. And then the other thing I'll usually drink a lot is tea. So I'm a English breakfast, or Irish breakfast tea. Those usually have just as much caffeine as coffee, and they taste better to me.
Wow. Yeah, well, tea is good. Yeah, you make up.
But I know this is a cyber coffee house hour, so therefore I decided to bring some. I do have some of these. I usually have about one a day, and so I decided to have that this morning as we were talking.
No, I appreciate that. So if you could have any superpower to help you in cybersecurity, what would it be and why?
That's a good question. Any superpower in cybersecurity? I think it would be to be able to convince people to do the thing that I tell them they need to do. And the reason I say that is, if you've ever worked as a cybersecurity consultant or as a director or whatever, even if you're a CSO or a CIO, right? You always have a boss. There's always somebody else controlling the purse string. So even if you're the CSO of a large organization, you've got multi-million-dollar budgets, you've got all the people working for you, and you know the right answer of what to do. But guess what? You still got to go to the CFO, the chief financial officer, the CRO, the chief risk officer, the COO, the chief operating officer, and the CEO, the chief executive officer, to get their buy-in and approval for whatever big plan you want to do, right? I can build the most secure network in the world, but if I can't get the money or the resources or the people behind it, I can't do anything, right? I have lots of great ideas, but if I don't get funding for them, they'll never happen. That's why I said it's all about the language of risk, money, and business. If you can understand that, you'll be better off. And so if I had a superpower, it would be like, I would like to be able to do the little I Dream a Genie, the little nose wiggle. And all of a sudden, Joseph goes, yes, Jason, whatever you need, I will write that blank check. I agree. And depending on your organization, you may get to the point where you almost have that superpower. I've been in a couple of places where I've had that superpower because I've been there for 2 or 3 or 4 years. And within the first 3 or 4 months, I go, oh, Jason does know what he's talking about. And I don't know cyber, but Jason does. I should listen to Jason. And so I've had some of those bosses over the years, those C-suite executives who go, yes, they implicitly trust what I tell them and they will give me the funds to do it. I've had other places where I have to basically fight for months and months to convince them that this is the right thing to do. Because again, everything is a competition inside the business. If our business budget is $10 million this year for operations, and we have to split that up between operations and manpower and recruiting and software and everything else, and I say, I need $1 million to protect this, that's 1/10 of the budget. Good freaking luck, right? Not going to happen. But being able to go, if I could have the magic wand to get whatever I want, that'd be great. But we can't. And so generally we have to figure out, when I come up with a proposal, I usually come up with 3 proposals to my bosses. Like, okay, here's my low, my mid, and my high. If you give me all the money and time and resources in the world, this is what I would do. And this would perfectly protect your network. And they go, well, that's too expensive. I said, okay. Then I have number 2. This is kind of the big grade solution. I can do this much, but you're giving up this, and here's your risks. Okay. And here's number 1. This is the minimum you need to do. This minimum is based on regulatory, legal requirements. We must do at least this. But here's all the risk you're going to be taking. And then they can make their decision, because at the end of the day, the CEO and the COO, they're the ones who have to fund this, and they are the ones who have to live with the decisions they make, because this is a business decision unless you're working in an IT company. And most of us aren't working in an IT or cyber company. We are working as IT or cyber in a different business. I have a friend who works for an airline. He does cyber and he does a great job at it. But guess what? They don't really care about cyber, except in the fact that it helps them continue to fly planes and make money. I have another friend, and she works in manufacturing. She only cares about cyber, and as far as it means the machines are still running and that toilet paper is coming off so we can sell it in the store, because that's their business, right? It's not like we're working in an MSP or a cybersecurity consulting firm where what we do is cyber. It's really easy when you work in those organizations because they understand cyber, right? And now you can be a technical expert as opposed to trying to convince the business why they need you.
So, and thank you for that. So, and last question here as we close out the show. What are like some of your hobbies, interests, recreational things you like to do outside of cybersecurity?
So I love to travel. If you follow me on Facebook or Instagram, you'll probably see all my travels all over the place. I just got back from a 2-week trip across the U.S. West Coast, I started in Portland, then I went to Vegas, then I went down through the Hoover Dam and the Grand Canyon, went through all 5 of the big national parks in Utah, ended up in Moab, Utah, took a 2-day train ride to Denver, and then I flew over to Nashville, and then I finally flew home. So I had like a 2-week trip just crossing the country. And as I did that, I was seeing all I like photography. So I was out there trying to take a bunch of pictures, trying to get some interesting shots. I was doing hikes because I like hiking and the outdoors. And I love traveling. So I travel a lot. In fact, a week from today, I'll be getting on another plane. I'll be gone for 5 weeks because I'm going to speak at a conference in Lisbon, and then I'm flying up to Paris, and then to Barcelona, and then back to Miami. And so for 5 weeks, I'll be like a week or 2 in each of these places as I move around. And the other thing I love to do is I like writing books. They're all nonfiction, cybersecurity type books. I write textbooks, but they don't read like a textbook, because I try to make it relevant and bring it towards the practicality aspect as opposed to just memorize these definitions. And so as part of this trip, I'm actually taking a 2-week cruise back from Barcelona to Miami, because during that 2 weeks, I'll have 11 sea days. And when I'm at sea, I sit on my balcony and I work on my next book. So hopefully by the time I come back, I'll have the manuscript done. And that way we can get that book out, early next year.
That's awesome.
And that one's all on AI, mastering AI security is what I'm currently working on. Yep.
Nice. Yep. Well, Jason, it's definitely been a pleasure and an honor having you on the show. Appreciate you spending your time, sharing your knowledge and expertise with our listeners. And yeah, as we get ready to close out, any closing remarks you want to share before we close things out?
Yeah, so if you guys want to, guys and gals out there want to see Acylade and what we're doing, the best place to check us out is going to be at akylade.com, and it's spelled a little funny. It's pronounced Akylade, like, yay, congratulations. But it's spelled AKYLADE.com. That's AKYLADE.com, and I'm sure it'll be in the show notes or after my name or something. You'll see the name there. But go check out akylade.com. If you want to get involved with what we're doing and you're trying to get certified, you can go there and learn about the certifications. You can download free practice exams and the objectives for the exams from there. And you can also find out about our new beta exams that are coming out, because we're releasing new exams every year in this practical vein. Our first 2 exams are already out. As we're filming this right now, our risk management certifications are in beta, and starting next week, the AI certifications go into beta. And then next year, we'll be doing the SOC analyst, incident response, programmers and developers, and a bunch of other certifications. So definitely check that out. Akylade.com/beta has our roadmap, and you can see what is currently scheduled and released and what days those are coming out for those beta exams. So definitely get involved there. And then also, if you want to follow us on LinkedIn, that's where we keep all of our most up-to-date information. It's linkedin.com/in/Akylade or Akylade certified. You'll find that there. And we're Akylade certified on pretty much every social media platform out there. So if you want to learn about more of what we do, that's the best place to do it. If you want to stay connected with me, I am Jason Dion on most of the major platforms, or diontraining.com is my website for the training side of things I do. And one of the big points there is that, the training side, that's where you cover all your normal certifications. So if you want CISSP or Security Plus or whatever, we've got all that with Dion Training. The Akylade side is where we're doing this new innovative testing and methodology. And we don't do any training at Akylade. We have ATPs, or authorized training partners, and they do the training. So if you're looking for training, we can push you in the right direction. We, as a certification company, we build the exams and we build the official textbooks, but everything else is done through our training partners.
Awesome. Yep. That's amazing. Again, thank you, Jason, for your time. And also, thank you, those listening and watching, and for joining us for another episode of the Cyber Coffee Hour, part of the Akylade Podcast Network. If you enjoyed this episode, explore more engaging content in the Akylade Podcast Network app. By supporting this podcast and nearly 100 other Black hosted shows, you can enjoy ad-free listening while contributing to a diverse range of voices in the podcasting space. We appreciate your support and look forward to sharing more insightful conversations with you in our next episode. So until then, keep brewing those ideas and stay curious about cybersecurity. All right, that's it. It's a wrap. We out of here. Peace.